Okay, so welcome to Thursday night sharing for about the software testing, and tonight is the fourth time of the sharing online. So then tonight we have a guest speaker from the Canada, Gregory, the co-author of the 3 book, Agile Testing, More Agile Testing, and the latest book is the Agile Testing Content. And maybe in 1 or 2 months will be translated in Thai. Yep, it's still on my process now. Okay,
Yay.
and co-founder of the Agile Testing Fellow or Agile Testing Fellowship website. Then she and her friend Lisa designed the class, the 3-day Agile Testing for the whole team. And that's for small marketing that will be have a class in Bangkok, 2 or 3 that I will announce it again on my personal Facebook. Yep. Okay, Janet will be share tonight on the topic of acceptance test defense development. Yep. Are you ready, Janet?
I am. I'll share my screen whenever it's ready. All right.
Okay, the session is yours.
Oh, you have to set me as host.
Yep. Set
you have to make
host.
me, yeah.
Yep. Make you a co-host. Yep. And put
All
you
right.
to share. You have a right to share. Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep. Okay. You have one crab to welcome on the side. Okay.
All right. Yeah. Just sharing my screen.
Yep.
There you go.
Okay.
All right. So now I have to figure out. Let me know if you see anything else besides just the.
Yep. We can see the PowerPoint.
Perfect. Perfect.
Yep. Okay.
All right. I'm just kind of arranging my screens here so I can see everything that I need to see. All right, so the in many of the teams that I talk to, the focus is on DevOps, which is the newest or continuous delivery, the newest kinds of things that people are trying to do. But I find they forget some of the basics. So I'm really glad that Noom is talking about unit testing, some of those real basics. So I want to talk a little bit more about acceptance test-driven development, which encompasses unit testing, and I'll show how that works. First, I'll talk just a little bit about me. I find it helps if people know who I am and where I come from. So I started off as a programmer. I programmed for about 6 years, and then I became a QA manager. I moved into testing, and I did that for quite a few years, went back to testing because testing was, for me, way more fun than programming. Way more fun than being a QA manager. So I went back to testing, but I was lucky enough that I got into a team, and this was in the early 2000s, 2001. I got into a team that was practicing Agile. And I learned how much better testing could be in an Agile world than in the waterfall world. So my view of software development actually changed completely. As I started learning more and doing more, I did some writing, as New mentioned, 3 books now. Agile Testing was in 2009. More Agile Testing was in 2014. And then Agile Testing Condensed came out in 2019, so just last year. I started writing blog posts and other kinds of things. I developed a whole lot of new skills. I adapted other ones that I had. And then I started doing more speaking and different things as well. As part of that, Lisa Crispin, my co-author on all 3 books, and I developed that Agile Testing for the whole team approach, the course, because we feel that it's not good enough for testers to know about testing, but the whole team, including programmers and the product owners and everybody else on an Agile team, really needs to understand. And we've created this, I don't know, community called the Agile Testing Fellowship, where we hope people will share what they know. So that's a little bit about me. I like quotes, especially if they make me think. And this one got a lot of thoughts in running around in my head. So I hope it does that for you too. No one is dumb who is curious. The people who don't ask questions remain clueless throughout their lives. So to me, that says, please ask questions, ask lots of questions, because that's the way you learn. Now, you might be wondering what this has to do with the topic. As I talk with many teams, some of the people on those teams have forgotten rule number 1 about testing activities. At least that's my rule number 1. So be curious, ask questions. QA actually stands for, a good friend of mine said, QA stands for question asker. And I really like that. So ask questions, ask lots of questions. When I talk about Agile testing, it's really how do we adapt testing? How does it fit in to our Agile teams? It's an activity. It happens throughout. It is not a phase at the end. We're always testing. It's not a methodology at all, right? But testing should be interactive. It should start from the first time we are introduced to a new feature. And it's much more than testing code. So we call our course the whole team, or the Agile Testing for the whole team, because it really is a whole team responsibility. It is only the whole team that can really help, that can help elevate, can help raise the level of quality. So if the team is thinking about testing, if the team solves problems together, including testing problems, and if everyone collaborates, that's when we can get a shared understanding of the problems. So there's testing activities, right? Some of the testing activities that we don't always think about is asking questions. I already talked about that. Starting with examples, starting with tests, checking, which kind of is, and I'll talk a little bit more about that, but making sure it does what it's supposed to do, right? And the investigation part of it, investigating the tests. Now, there's lots of different kinds of things. I mean, asking questions, we can ask questions in a lot of different ways, in a lot of different contexts. Starting with examples and tests is around acceptance test driven development, ATDD. Some of you might know that as BDD, behavioral driven development. Checking is where we do automation, and investigation is where we would do exploratory tests, load and stress tests, those kinds of things. And I'll talk about each of these a little bit. The ATDD will be my biggest focus though. So, acceptance test driven development. It starts with your feature, with your examples. We slice up that feature into user stories, and that's what we work with day to day. As we start examining those user stories, we have conversations. Some people might be using the 3 amigos, some people might be using whole team, but we are exploring what that story means. We'll be exploring examples, concrete examples to say, what do we really mean? and we get that shared understanding. And then we have this magic where we code and test and automate, and the story is tested, we fix the defects all the way along, and hopefully it's accepted by the product owner or the product manager, whoever is playing that role. So it starts with asking the questions. It starts with those examples. Now, if we look at that fixing defects in the center, when we ask questions early, when we're examining that user story, when we're fixing defects, the defects are in our understanding. So they don't cost anything to fix because we're fixing them. They prevent the defects in the code. So the defects afterwards cost more, and we would like to not have very many of those. But a lot of people don't understand this code and test and automate. And this is kind of what I want to dig a little bit deeper in today, because it's a magic. People say, just make it so. A lot of the methodologies like Scrum talks about how do we get stories in, how do we make our stories better, but they don't talk about the code, the test, and the automation. How do we actually implement it? So when we're doing acceptance test-driven development, I'm going to start with that acceptance test. So the acceptance tests, some people call it acceptance criteria, is how do we know when our story is going to be done? I like to use actual tests rather than criteria because it gives me a more concrete kind of idea about what it is. So we're going to start this coding part of it with our acceptance test. That is going to lead what we're going to build. So we walk out of pretend we've already done our story readiness, our backlog refinement meetings, whatever you want to call that. We know what our story is. We've had our iteration planning meeting, or if we're doing Kanban, we've talked about the story, we know what we're going to do. So we walk back to our desks or whatever we're doing, and as a tester, I will go and expand the tests, which means that I will start to think about all the different areas that make sense. What do we want to test? So we'll expand the tests, and then one of the most important things, one of the most important pieces is collaboration. So I will take the tests, not detailed tests, probably they'll look more like variations. It might say, so if I was doing something like a username and password, something simple, I would be saying that I want to test with duplicate usernames. I'm going to test with this. If I was doing a password, I would be thinking about testing with the right characters, all the rules, right? So I'm going to take those variations. I'm going to sit with the programmer or who's ever doing the automation. I have a preference that I like to have the programmer do the automation piece, the test method, for lots of reasons. But who's ever doing the automation at the API level, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to pair with that person. We're going to talk about the tests. At what level do they be? Are they going to be at the API level? Are they going to be unit level tests? Because, for example, if I was doing the password and one of my variations was check for leading or trailing blanks, then maybe the programmer would say, but Janet, that should be a unit test. I'd go, okay, that's good. right? So we'll talk about where those tests belong. They might even be a full workflow test that needs to go through the UI. And we'll have questions like, did we really think about the quality attributes? Do we need to instrument the code for performance, for example? Do we know how we're going to test security? We may have talked a little bit about that before, but it doesn't hurt to repeat those things. But the biggest outcome of that pairing will be, what should the test method look like for those API level functional tests? Because that's what we want to automate for the story. So at that point, once we figure that out, then we will know what our test methods are. We will, so the programmer or who's ever doing the test automation can create those test methods. I, as a tester, or who's ever doing that, can write the tests in the automation framework that we decided should go there. So that's a really big piece. To me, that's the magic, that collaboration. That's what makes this really work. So once we have those tests, we haven't written any code yet, we're going to select a test and run it, right? So our tests are a business of functionality, the higher level tests. We're going to take one of those tests, probably the first one would be the happy path, the expected behavior, right? So we'll take that test and we'll run it. It will fail because there's no code, right? And then this is where your unit tests come in. So if you are practicing test-driven development, TDD, you're going to take that first happy path business test, and you're going to create a bunch of unit tests. And as you're doing your unit test, as you're doing your TDD, you're going to write a little unit test, you're going to run it, it will fail. That's the red. You get, and then you write the code, enough code to make that unit test pass, green. And then if necessary, you refactor. And you do that loop, this red-green refactor loop, as many times as you need to make that business level test pass, right? And so it's a cycle within a cycle. And then you take the next test and you do it again. You repeat that as many times as you need to until you have all of the identified tests passing. So just think about that. We now have all of our API level functional tests for that story, and they're passing. We have our automation for the story at the API level. That's pretty awesome. So we do all of that, we have our automation, and now we have the time to do performing some perhaps exploratory testing, any other kind of investigation steps that might happen. One of my favorite things to do is, as soon as a developer says to me, Janet, I've finished coding, all of those tests pass, I will say, show me. And we have a little check right there. The programmer gives me a little demo. If we find any bugs, it's still in development, he'll fix them. But once we've done all of that, then I can start doing and performing exploratory testing or any other kinds of testing required for the definition of done. And so that's how this works. It comes back and it completes that whole cycle. The final piece of the puzzle is that acceptance test. This is what started it all, the high-level acceptance So our product manager or product owner will take and hopefully hands-on test and say, yeah, you know what? I can log in. This is good. I get the right error. This is good. Whatever it happens to be. So you can see how the importance of the unit tests, it sits in the center of this, but it has to be the business that drives it, the high-level examples, the high-level tests. All right. Now this, you don't have to actually read this. It doesn't, it's not that important for you folks. But this is an example of, years ago I did acceptance test-driven development, so it works. I know it works. I set up the gray stuff on here is the data, and I wrote the test in the automation framework. So this particular test was supposed to bring back I was doing a query. It was supposed to bring 3 different rows back. I checked in the test. I talked to the programmer. He hadn't done any code yet. And I said, the test is ready. So he checked out the test. He looked at it and he said, Janet, this won't pass. So it made us have a conversation because we didn't have that shared understanding. After I figured that out, the understanding was on his end, which was good because he hadn't written the code, but I realized it could have been on my side. So that's why I say I take the variations to the programmer first, because we would have had that conversation. If I would have been wrong, I would have had to redo this, and that would be rework, and that would be a waste. So we really want to think about what we're doing. I talked a little bit earlier about the definition of done. And I'm not going to go into a lot of details in this. You are welcome to download. On my last slide, I have my contact information, but on agiletester.ca, we have chapter 8 from our second book, More Agile Testing, and we talk about the quadrants. So you're welcome to go read all you want. Or in condensed when it's in Thai, when Noom finishes it. Now, the idea behind the quadrants is to identify the tests that you run. So there's 4 quadrants. The ones on the left are guiding development. So tests we write before code. The ones on the right are critiquing the product. So we write them after the code. The tests that will help to start the acceptance test-driven development are up in this top left-hand corner, right? Our acceptance tests, things that guide us, right? You can see the unit tests are in technology facing, which just means the language of the test your business won't be able to read. But there's also business facing that critique the product, our exploratory testing, for example. But there's a whole lot of other tests that fall into this 4th quadrant, this lower right-hand quadrant, critiquing the product, technology facing. These are all of the tests that are the quality attributes. How do we make it better? So performance, load, can it be recovered? All of those types of tests. Now, when we're talking about done, we want to think about what tests do we run for story done? But there might be another group that are part of feature done, because a feature has many stories, right? So the whole idea behind using a model like the quadrants is to be able to have those conversations. They are thinking tools. So really understand how they can help you. That's all I'm talking about, the quadrants today. You can ask me lots of questions or you can go read about them. Checking is making sure the product does what it's supposed to do, right? The regression tests are, does the system do today what it did yesterday? And this is all about automation. It really is. We want to be thinking about how can we automate? But there's much more than checking. When we talk about checking, we think about the automation pyramid, which is what level do we want to automate? Those unit tests, those are so important because it's the base of what we're trying to do. It's really, our regression tests, because it's the fastest feedback, the regression tests, those unit tests are critical. The business rules, the functional tests, that's what we are testing with that acceptance test-driven development, right? And then the workflow tests through the user interface, those are the ones we want the very least of because they're the most expensive. And they usually relate to the feature, not to individual stories. So if we think about it, there are different layers from when we automate, right, and how we automate. So we need to have these conversations about what level are they at. Your unit tests, they're at the programmer level. They're programmer tests. They are when you're actual coding. When we talk about investigation, right, that's where we talk about exploratory testing. We want to think about what didn't we think about? What couldn't we automate? What are the surprises? What are the interactions that we hadn't considered before? Those quality attributes, things like load, right? How much can we pile on before it breaks? Stress, right? How fast can we go? There's lots of different kinds of things like security, recoverability as well. And I think that a lot of teams don't consider these quality attributes. And these are constraints. We have to think about how do we build this into our system. So consider some of this stuff as part of unit tests as well. How do we, maybe not unit tests, but how do we instrument our code so that we can do good performance testing? How do we build security in? So that's a type of testing that the programmers need to think about besides that pure functionality, making it pass. So it's important to be thinking about this sort of thing. And so I'm going to just kind of wrap up this. I hope there's a few questions. There's none posted on Pigeon yet. When you're thinking about testing, really think about it from the very beginning, early, right? Ask those questions. Be curious. The more questions you ask, the better your understanding will be. And use those questions and examples, right? Can you give me an example? Those are what's going to be guiding development. If the whole team truly believes in it, then you're going to think about testability. When you're writing those unit tests first, that's going to help you build testability into your product and help the whole team, right? And remember, it's more than, quote, just testing functionality. It's all of those other things, those quality attributes as well. So my favorite question to ask in a meeting, when I'm maybe in a design meeting or talking with a programmer or talking to the product owner, is to say, how can we test that? Because that's a question that makes people think. And that's the end of my presentation. And so we can have some questions if anybody has questions. This is my contact information. My personal website is janetgregory.ca. There's my email, there's my Twitter, Agile Testing Fellowship. I don't have that on there, but you can Google it. I have links from Agile Tester and from my other website. This agiletester.ca is where you can download the chapter on the quadrants. And I think that's about it. So I'll open it up to questions, and I'll stop sharing so I can see the people again. Hang on, stop share.
Okay. So we had a lot of questions on the PG, and number is 0.
Yeah, no questions.
Yep, no questions.
So when I see no questions, I think either I did such a good job on explaining that nobody had any questions, or everybody got bored and went to sleep.
No.
But I choose the first. I think the first.
Yep. Okay, Thai people, anybody have any question for Janet for sharing about her acceptance test event, or maybe the question about her how to adopting Agile or the testing in Agile? Yep.
No.
Oh, have one question in the chat from Nippon. I love QA. Stands for question and ask. This is the feedback.
I like that too. I remember when I first heard it, it was a friend of mine, Pete Whalen, and he has some great blog posts, but he gave me his business card, and I took it and I looked at it, and I kind of looked at it and went to go put it away. And he said, "No, Janet, look closer." And so I looked a little bit closer and I saw the QA on it. And I know that he doesn't like that phrase. And so I looked puzzled. I must have looked puzzled. And he said, "Look closer." And so I actually looked at the business card and I read it. And he said, "QA question asker." And I went, that is the best definition of QA I have ever heard. So yes. So I no longer have a problem with QA. I just, in my brain, I just translate it to question asker.
Yeah, I think it's good.
Yeah.
To use it in Thailand too. Okay, I have a question from Bert. Any tip for acceptance test even beginners?
Yeah, so a lot of times when I first started and I would talk, when we'd be having our meetings and I'd say, "Hey, product owner, can you give us a test? What is the acceptance test for this?" Because that's what starts it all. And they would not have any idea, how do I write a test? So I started by asking examples. I said, instead of saying, "Can you give me a test?" I would say, "Can you give me examples? Walk me through that. Just tell me what you think. What would this look like?" Examples might be in the form of a table. It might be a drawing. It might be anything. But then we can start to put that into whatever form we use for our tests. One of the harder things to do is when you sit, if you are a tester or somebody doing the testing and you're thinking about all the tests, the harder thing is to get the programmers to wait for you. That's a hard thing to do. So one of the things I started to do was every time we started talking about a story, I would jot down ideas. I'd have a piece of paper and I'd start writing my stuff down. So when I walk out of the iteration planning meeting, I had a really good idea of everything I wanted to test. I would try to get to the programmer as soon as I could. And what I start to do is would bring the question to them. I'd say, could you look at these tests with me? I want to see if I have the right idea. So nothing about anything else. It's just a conversation to help me. But even that little bit got the programmer to start thinking about testing. The next thing I would do is a little bit later, I would say to one of my favorite programmers, probably the one I had on the best relationship with, is, could I try an experiment with you? Could you have these tests and look at them before you start coding? Would this help you? Now, I've had the other way where I've had questions that said, the testers won't give me the tests first, right? So from a programming perspective, you might want to go and say, hey, tester, I really want to start coding, but I'd really like to have a better idea of what kinds of things you're going to test. Could we have that conversation? And I would try to go backwards, right, to get as much information as I could before I start coding. Hopefully that helps. It's those little conversations that matter.
Okay, thank you very much for the answers. I think we still have a time for one question. Yep. If the participant, you have the question, you can post it in the, okay, the other question from Plit. What is the common mistake for acceptance test driven beginner?
I think that the most common mistake is thinking it's about the tool, right? Especially in when people are doing BDD. Somehow they think by putting my test in Gherkin that I'm doing BDD, that I'm doing acceptance test driven development. It's in Gherkin, it's in Cucumber, it's in whatever I've done. So we're doing BDD. We're doing acceptance test driven development, but it's not about the tool. The automation is a side effect. It's about the conversation and the shared understanding. That's truly what it's about. It's not about the tool. The tool is a side effect. The automation is a side effect that happens. That's the biggest mistake I see.
I like it. Okay, have one question. If you have a time. Yep, the question in the chat that I found that if the tester who forgot on the system and backend for many years, it's hard for them to look as a business field. Do you have any suggestion?
Yeah, it's the same problem that many programmers have as well, right? And so one of the things from a testing perspective is if you think about how would the customer use this, really start thinking about that, and whether or not you think about different personas, because there will be different types of customers, is really try to think about that. So it might even help to have create the personas so your team say, so for example, my Agile Testing Fellowship. If my developer is just working on the back end, we're going to have a conversation and we're going to say, so who are the users? We might have the developer who wants to know more about, because he really cares about quality. So he or she might be one of our personas that we need to think about. What are they going to want? One of our personas might be our training providers, the people who actually are doing the training. So if we understand our customers, what their needs are, that will help drive the business view because we have a better understanding. So I would suggest the first thing to do is focus on your customers. Who is using your system?
Yeah, okay. I think Pitaya will get the answer to using for your day-to-day working now. Okay.
Okay.
Yep. Also, I think it's good to have experience sharing from Janet tonight for the Thailand software testing community. Yep. So as on behalf of the Thailand tester community and software development community, thank you very much for Janet for your time for sharing tonight. Yep.
Thank you.
Yep.
Have a good evening. It's early here.
Yeah.
It was 7 a.m. when I got on. So
Yeah.
I'm just having my coffee, and I
Yep.
know it's evening for you. So have a good evening.
Yep.
I hope you enjoyed it.
Yeah,
We'll
thank you
talk to
very
you
much,
later.
Janet. Yeah, talk to you later. So, for the Thai people, the recording video will be uploaded to YouTube on tomorrow morning without the subtitle. If my team can have a time to put the subtitle, the next version will be uploaded to the YouTube after that. Okay, so I think it's time for end up for this challenge, and see all you guys again on the next Thursday on the topic of return on investment of automation testing challenge from me and my team. Yep. Okay. So thank you very much again for Janet, and thank you for all participants. Have a good night and a great day for Janet.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye for now on. Thank you very much.
Thank you.